In Williamsburg, Virginia, in 1765, Thomas Jefferson bought a copy of the Quran. He put it in his law library, since for him, it was an inspired law book produced by one of the world's great legislators, Muhammad. From the 18th century onwards, many European and American leaders saw Muhammad as a symbol of justice and law. Napoleon was among them, as we shall see. Indeed, today, portrayal of Muhammad as one of 18 lawgivers graces the frieze in the central chamber of the U.S. Supreme Court, meant to incarnate the principles of justice that the court upholds. I'm John Tolan, professor of history at the University of Nantes in France. For over 30 years, I've been researching the intertwined histories of Jews, Christians, and Muslims in Europe and the Mediterranean world. This video is based on a chapter of my recent book, Faces of the Prophet, A History of Western Portrayals of Muhammad. In the book, I show that while many Europeans from the Middle Ages to today had a negative, polemical perception of Muhammad, others looked on him with fascination and admiration. Let's get back then to Jefferson's Quran. It was a copy of the translation by George Sale, published in London in 1734. Earlier translations of the Quran into Latin, French, English, and other European languages explained that they translated the Muslim holy book in order to refute it, to expose Islam as fallacious. Sale, on the contrary, sought to faithfully render the spirit and letter of the Quran, which he saw as the work of a brilliant, inspired religious reformer, Muhammad. In his introduction, Sale traced the early history of Islam and idealized the prophet as an iconoclastic, anti-clerical reformer who had quashed the power of a corrupt and avaricious clergy and banished the superstitious beliefs and practices of early Christians. They take their priests and their monks for their lords besides God and Christ the Son of Mary. Although they are commanded to worship God only, there is no God but He. Sale's translation was widely read and appreciated in England, particularly by those who sought to limit the power of the Anglican Church. Muhammad had become a symbol of anti-clerical republicanism. Sale's translation was influential outside of England as well. We saw that Thomas Jefferson bought a copy in 1765. It helped him conceive of a philosophical deism which surpassed confessional boundaries. When Keith Ellison, the first Muslim member of Congress, took his oath of office in 2007, he had his hand on Jefferson's copy of the Quran, which is now in the Library of Congress. Goethe read a German translation of Sale's version. It helped color his evolving notion of Muhammad as an inspired poet, an archetypal prophet. And Voltaire cites with admiration Sale's translation. In his World History, the Essai sur les Mœurs, he presents Muhammad as a fanatique de bonne foi, an inspired reformer who abolished superstitious practices and eradicated the power of a corrupt clergy. Indeed, by the end of the century, writers such as English Whig Edward Gibbon, an avid reader of both Sale and Voltaire, saw Muhammad as a great man, charismatic leader, reformer, and legislator of the Arab nation. Napoleon, thanks to his reading of the Quran, styled himself as a new Muhammad. Claude-Étienne Savary produced a new French translation of the Quran in 1783. He wrote his translation in Egypt. There, surrounded by the music of the Arabic language, he sought to render into French the beauty of the Arabic text. Like Sale, he wrote a long introduction in which he presents Muhammad as a great, extraordinary man, a genius on the battlefield, and a man who knew how to inspire loyalty among his followers. Napoleon read this translation on the ship that took him to Egypt in 1798. He took inspiration from Savary's portrait of Muhammad as a brilliant general, sage lawgiver, and charismatic leader. Napoleon sought to be a new Muhammad and hoped that Cairo's religious elite would accept him and his French soldiers as fellow Muslims come to liberate Egyptians from Ottoman tyranny. Napoleon even claimed that his own arrival in Egypt had been predicted in the Quran. If Bonaparte saw himself as a new Muhammad, he wasn't alone in that assessment. Goethe in 1806 proclaimed enthusiastically that the emperor was Der Mahomet der Welt, the Muhammad of the world, and Victor Hugo portrayed him as a Mahomet d'Occident, Muhammad of the West. Napoleon himself, at the end of his life, exiled by the British to the island of St. Helena, as he ruminated on his defeat, wrote about Muhammad, defended his legacy, and presented the prophet as a great man who changed the course of history. Napoleon saw in Muhammad qualities that resembled his own, conqueror and lawgiver, persuasive and charismatic, but recognized that Muhammad was far more successful, never being exiled to a cold, windswept island in the South Atlantic. Both Napoleon and Muhammad are represented among the 18 lawgivers in the frieze sculpted by Adolf Weinman for the U.S. Supreme Court in 1935. Brandishing his law book, the Quran, the prophet stands between Christian emperors Justinian and Charlemagne. For Weinman, the U.S. Supreme Court epitomizes universal principles of justice embodied by historical figures to diverse cultures, from ancient Egypt and China to 20th century America. The representation of Muhammad stands tall among these historical figures of law and justice, just as he had in the writings of Enlightenment authors like Voltaire and Jefferson. This is worth bearing in mind today, when Islamicist extremists claim to apply the law of the Prophet Muhammad, and right-wing nationalists in the U.S. and Europe ignore the important role Islam has played in the making of Western culture. These are just a few of the surprising Western portrayals of Islam's prophet that I explore in my book, Faces of Muhammad, recently published at Princeton University Press. If you like this video, please share it, and take a look at my book. Thank you. I'm John Tolan for the Amir Stein Center.
If you want to see more content like this, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell notification so you don't miss any new videos.